I never imagined my children, my own flesh and blood, would one day sit across a cold lawyer's table, eyes hardened, voices sharp, arguing over the pieces of my life I left behind, when I held them as babies, kissed their scraped knees, whispered bedtime promises of forever. I believed love was enough to bind us through anything. But I was wrong. The truth is, the last years of my life were lonelier than I dare admit. I watched from the quiet corners of my home as old family photos gathered dust. Phone calls grew infrequent. Visits became rushed. Always an excuse. Always something more important. I told myself they were busy. I told myself they loved me deep down. I didn't know then that my final birthday would be the last time we sat together in peace. That behind their smiles, resentments festered, silent calculations brewing over what they'd inherit when I was gone. If I had known, would I have done anything differently? Would I have rewritten my will? Would I have tried harder to heal the invisible wounds between us? Or were we always fated to break apart? There's a part of this story I've never shared, something that still keeps me up, something none of them know. And maybe it's time. If you've ever loved someone deeply and feared losing them to greed, silence, or time, this story is for you. Please leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel. Let's hold space for these painful, beautiful truths together. I remember the flicker of the last candle on my birthday cake, the way the wax bled down too quickly, like it was in a hurry to disappear, just like everything else. The room was dim, the overhead light too harsh, the shadows curling along the edges of the table where my children sat, one on each side of me, separated not by distance but by years of coldness. Neither of us had the courage to name. They smiled, or something like it, teeth flashing for the photos, for the polite moments, but their eyes darted constantly to their phones, the soft glow reflecting off their pupils like little moons. My daughter's laugh was brittle, sharp around the edges, as if she were trying too hard. I reached for her hand, needing that tiny moment of closeness, the brush of skin on skin, but she pulled away too fast, the stem of her wineglass clutched tight between her fingers. My son checked his watch 3 times before we even cut the cake. His eyes flicked to the door as though waiting for the moment he could leave, as though being here was an obligation, not a desire. I told myself, they're busy, they're adults now. But the words felt hollow in my chest. I wondered if they saw the way my fingers trembled slightly when I sliced into the cake, or if they noticed the extra chair I left at the table, the one no one sat in anymore. That night, after they were gone, a quick goodbye, a peck on the cheek, rushed promises of, "We'll talk soon, Mom." I sat alone in the kitchen, the silence louder than anything. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space, a low, steady drone that reminded me how long it had been since anyone laughed in this room. I stood up slowly, knees creaking, and walked to the wall where the old family photo hung. My fingers traced each tiny face, my son, grinning with a missing tooth, my daughter, clutching a stuffed bear, me and their father, long before the cracks split us apart. I pressed my thumb gently over my own face, trying to remember what that version of me had dreamed of, what she'd hoped her life would become. I whispered to myself, maybe next time they'll stay longer. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. I could feel it in my bones. The way things were shifting, the way time was running out. There was a sharp ache in my chest, not from anger, not even from sadness, but from the raw truth of being left behind by the people you love most. I just didn't know how little time was left. There was something I wanted to tell them that night, something I had been carrying in my heart for years, but I didn't. I let the moment slip away, the way so many moments had slipped away into the cracks of everyday life. I told myself there would be another chance, another dinner, another conversation, another birthday. But time has a way of stealing those chances when you're not looking. And when I blew out that last candle, I didn't realize it was the last wish I'd ever make with both of them sitting beside me. They left too soon that night, and I stayed too silent. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and coffee gone cold, a tired, lingering scent, like forgotten mornings and things left too long on the counter. I sat in the stiff leather chair, the kind that made your back ache if you leaned the wrong way, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I felt small there, like a ghost, hovering over a meeting that should have never happened, watching the fragments of my life broken into pieces. The words, "division of assets," floated in the air, cold and sharp, like tiny glass splinters. The lawyer spoke in a practiced, neutral tone, eyes flicking from one page to the next, as if my home, my jewelry, the tiny trinkets I'd kept from childhood, were nothing more than numbers on a page. But it was my children's faces that hurt the most. My daughter's mouth was tight, her lips a thin, hard line. She tapped her manicured nail against the edge of the table, a restless rhythm that pulsed through the room. My son sat with his arms crossed, jaw clenched, a muscle twitching along his cheek as he listened, interjected, negotiated. Their voices were low but cutting, precise, controlled, like they'd rehearsed. They spoke about the house, the savings, the furniture, the heirlooms. They spoke about money as if it were detached from me, as if I weren't their mother, but a ledger to be divided, a set of assets to be managed, carved up cleanly and fairly. I wanted to ask, "Do you remember the nights I stayed up sewing your Halloween costumes? The hours I spent holding you through fevers, singing softly until you fell asleep? Do you remember how I kissed your scraped knees, or the way I wrapped Christmas gifts so carefully each year, making sure the ribbons were just right?" But none of those memories were on the table. None of them counted here. My hands trembled in my lap, a small, silent tremor that no one noticed. I kept waiting for one of them to glance at me, just once, to meet my eyes, to give me a smile, a touch, something. But their gazes stayed locked on the lawyer's papers, as if the ink on those pages meant more than the lifetime we had shared. That's when it hit me. A cold wave creeping up from the pit of my stomach to my chest. Love wasn't part of the negotiation. It had slipped out of the room long before we ever sat down, and still, a part of me hoped. I hoped one of them would reach out, would say, "Mom, we don't care about the money, we just want you." But the hope felt thin, frayed, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. I wanted to speak, to break the heavy silence with something real, something raw. But the words stuck in my throat, thick and heavy, and I sat there instead, swallowing them down like bitter medicine. I wondered, when did we start measuring love in dollars and property? And worse, when did I let it happen? There's a letter, folded and yellowed, hidden away in the drawer of my nightstand. I can still picture it even now. The delicate curve of my handwriting on the front. Their names joined together in ink, though they hadn't truly been joined in years. I wrote it long ago, on a night when the loneliness wrapped so tightly around my chest, I thought I might stop breathing. I wrote it because I needed to tell the truth. It wasn't a long letter, not by anyone's standards, just a few pages, the paper thin and crinkled now, but the words inside heavier than I could ever carry on my own. It was meant for them, for my son and daughter, a confession of sorts, a map back to the mother they'd forgotten, or maybe never really knew, a hope that maybe, just maybe, after I was gone, they'd read it and understand why things turned out the way they did. But as the days ticked by and I watched the space between us widen, I found myself wondering if they would even want to understand. Did they even know who I was anymore? Or had I been reduced to nothing more than a burden, a duty, a name on the side of a will? I thought about the letter constantly in those final weeks. Should I give it to them? Should I wait? Would it change anything? Would they even care? Most nights, I sat on the edge of my bed, the envelope resting in my lap, the lamplight casting long shadows across the walls. I'd run my fingers along its edge, feeling the thin paper tremble slightly, like it too was afraid. I imagined handing it to them, imagined their faces as they read, imagined the way they might look at each other, maybe with softness, maybe with anger, maybe with a forgiveness none of us had known how to give while I was alive. But then the fear crept in, slow and sharp. What if they rejected it? What if they rejected me? Or worse, what if they used it against each other? Turned my confession into one more weapon in their silent war. And so, night after night, I hesitated. I tucked the letter back into the drawer, closed it gently, as if the wood might splinter under the weight of everything I wasn't saying. I told myself, tomorrow, I'll be brave. But tomorrow never felt quite right. I wonder now if they ever really knew me, or if we had all been pretending, playing the roles we thought we were supposed to, mother, son, daughter, while underneath, we were strangers living in the same story but reading different pages. What would you do if the people you loved most might not be able to forgive you, or forgive each other? Would you risk shattering the fragile peace just to unburden your heart? Or would you stay silent, hoping that somehow they'd find their way back to you on their own? After the birthday, I waited. I waited for calls that never came, for voices on the other end of the line that would say, "Hi, Mom, just checking in," or "I was thinking about you today." But the days blurred into weeks, the sun rising and falling without change, and still the phone sat quiet on the kitchen counter, gathering a thin film of dust I wiped away every morning, as if that small act of care would somehow make it ring. The mailbox stayed empty too. No cards, no letters, no surprise packages. I began to dread the hollow thunk of it opening and closing each afternoon, only to reveal ads and bills, and nothing, with their names written in careful, familiar handwriting. The house echoed, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but heavy, suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the window panes, reminded me how alone I was here. I found myself standing by the window more often, watching the street outside, watching the cars drive by. Sometimes, just for a second, my heart would leap when I saw a car I thought I recognized. A flash of red, the shape of a roof. But it was never them. It was never anyone coming for me. I wondered if they even thought of me as they went about their busy lives. Did they remember that I was here, waiting? Or had I become a shadow, someone they only remembered when the holidays rolled around or when a lawyer called? The hardest part was hearing the neighbors' grandchildren laughing outside. Their shrieks of joy carried over the fence, piercing the quiet of my kitchen like needles. I would press my hand to my chest, feeling the ache there the way my heart tugged and twisted inside me. I wanted to step outside, to soak in their laughter, to remind myself that joy still existed somewhere. But it wasn't mine anymore. There were so many times I wanted to pick up the phone, to dial their numbers, to hear the relief in their voices when they heard mine, or maybe the guilt. But pride, or maybe it was fear, kept me frozen. I told myself that they should be the ones to call, that they should want to call. And when they didn't, it only deepened the crack inside me. I began replaying old voicemails, scrolling back months, even years, just to hear their voices, just to remind myself what they sounded like when they were little, when they still needed me. I'd close my eyes, imagining their tiny hands in mine, the way they once clung to me when they were scared. Some nights, I told myself they'd surprise me, that I'd hear a car pull into the driveway, hear footsteps on the porch, and when I opened the door, they'd be there, arms open, smiles wide, ready to make everything right. I clung to that hope like a thread, but the door stayed closed. Always. I sat down at the kitchen table one quiet morning, the light soft through the window, and spread out the papers before me. The will, the accounts, the list I had made of little treasures. Small things I wanted them to have when I was gone. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, and the silence was thick, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to decide the shape of the future after I was no longer here. My hands shook as I picked up each paper, the words blurring on the page. I touched the edge of the document, running my finger over the line that read, "Last Will and Testament." It felt so final, so cold. Each item I listed was soaked in memory. The porcelain music box I'd given my daughter when she was 10, the watch that had belonged to their father, the yellowed letters from a time when love had been young and hope had seemed endless. But would they see it that way? Would they pick up these things and feel the pulse of the past, the heartbeat of what we once were? Or would they see only dollar signs, only division? I imagined them standing on opposite sides of the lawyer's office, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, waiting to claim what they thought they deserved. I tried to write, crossing things out, rewriting, crossing them out again, my tears smudging the ink until the paper was damp beneath my hands. My heart pounded as I thought, could I protect them from themselves, even now? Could I build something into these pages, some safeguard, some message that would remind them what mattered? In the end, I left a clause, one that might change everything, or destroy what little remained. I wrote it carefully, the pen heavy in my fingers. They could only inherit if they came together, if they found a way to stand side by side again. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the chance, however slim, that this could bring them back to each other, that they could look at the ashes of what we once were and remember that we were a family. Once. I sat there for hours, staring at the papers, the weight of them pressing down on my chest. How do you decide what's fair when love has already been lost? When the threads that once bound you together have frayed to nothing? I wanted to believe in the best parts of them, the parts I knew were still buried somewhere deep. But doubt crept in, whispering cruel things. What if they never come back? What if this only drives them further apart? I closed my eyes and let the tears come, shoulders shaking, hands gripping the edge of the table as though holding on for dear life. Outside, the world moved on without me. Cars passing, birds singing, the sun sliding higher into the sky. And inside, I was just a mother, trying to fix something that might already be too broken to mend. I wasn't there the day they read the will. Not physically, not anymore. But in my mind, I was standing in that cold gray room, watching them as if through a window I couldn't tap. The lawyer hadn't even finished the first line before their faces changed. My daughter, always so careful, so put together, narrowed her eyes, her mouth a tight line, the brittle edge of her voice slicing through the air. "What do you mean, she gets the house?" she snapped, the she thick with venom, even though it was her own brother sitting across the table. My son's fists clenched. He didn't raise his voice at first. That came later. But his jaw tightened, a muscle twitching just beneath the skin, and I recognized that look. The same one he had as a boy when someone took his toy, the silent building rage he never quite learned to let go of. It didn't take long before the room filled with sharp words and bitter accusations. They weren't talking about me, not really. They were talking about numbers, about fairness, about who got what, about things I never thought would matter after I was gone. My jewelry, the savings, the house with the creaky floorboards and the chipped paint. They fought over scraps, over old hurts they'd packed away but never truly healed. And I felt it, deep inside me, the breaking of my own heart, even though I wasn't there to stop it. I had imagined foolishly that they would grieve, that they would sit side by side, share memories, maybe even laugh through their tears. I thought my absence would pull them closer, the way grief sometimes does, wrapping people in the same ache. But instead, they went to war. Behind each word they threw like daggers, I heard the real wound. She loved you more. No, she loved you more. That was the core of it, wasn't it? It was never about money. It was about a lifetime of small moments. The ones I got wrong, the ways I showed up for one and not the other, the ways I failed them both without meaning to. I wondered, as the lawyer read the rest of the will in that stiff voice, if they even remembered the woman they were fighting over. Did they remember the nights I sat by their beds, cooling their foreheads when they were sick? The mornings I packed lunches and kissed foreheads, even when I was running late? The birthday cakes I baked from scratch, the ones they barely noticed by the time they were teenagers? Did they remember me? Or was I just a list of assets now? And in the middle of all their shouting, all their resentment, I wondered something that I wish I could ask them, even now. If you could hear me, would you stop? Would you remember who we were, who I was, before all this broke us apart? There's something I never told them. Even now, sitting here in this empty house, my fingers trembling over the edge of the armrest, I can feel the weight of it. A secret pressed down on my chest for decades, heavy as stone. It lives in the letter I never mailed, the one I kept hidden at the back of the drawer in the old oak desk upstairs. It's still there, tucked between yellowing papers and brittle memories, waiting. I was young when I made the choice, so young, so scared, desperate, really. Alone. I hadn't known what the years ahead would look like, what I was stepping into, or what kind of mother I would become. I only knew that I had to survive, that I had to do what I thought was best, even if it left a scar I couldn't name. When they were small, I thought often about telling them. I'd watch them play in the yard, their small hands grabbing at the sky, their faces lifted toward me with such blind, beautiful trust. And I'd wonder, could they handle knowing? Could they carry the truth of who I was, of the things I'd done before they were even born? But every time the words pushed up into my throat, I swallowed them down. I told myself it was for their sake, that protecting them from the past was the right thing, that I was shielding them from pain. But deep down, I wonder if it was for me. If I was the one afraid, the one too weak to face the fallout. Now, years later, with the end creeping closer, I wonder if keeping the secret was an act of love or an act of cowardice. I can still feel the edges of the letter when I think about it, the texture of the paper, the careful, deliberate handwriting. I poured everything into that letter, the truth about the choice I made, the reasons, the regret, the hope. I left nothing out because I wanted them to know me, not the mother they thought they knew, but the flawed, trembling woman who made a desperate decision and never forgave herself. I imagine them finding it after I'm gone. I picture my daughter's hands shaking as she unfolds the pages, my son pacing, his brow furrowed, anger flickering in his eyes. Would they understand? Would they forgive? Or would it just be another crack in the fragile glass of our family, another splinter driven between us? Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to burn the letter, to let the secret die with me. Maybe they're better off not knowing. Maybe some truths do more harm than good. But then I think about the hollow spaces between us, the silences that grew too wide to cross, and I wonder if the truth might have been the bridge we never built. Would they have understood the woman behind the mother? Or would they only see the betrayal? Sometimes the hardest part isn't the secret itself. It's knowing when to let it go. It was late, near midnight, when I heard the soft knock at the door. The house had been still for hours, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sleep, pressing into the walls, the floorboards, my chest. I thought I had imagined it, that maybe it was just the wind rattling a loose shutter, but then I heard it again, gentle, hesitant, like a memory reaching out. When I opened my eyes, she was there, my daughter. Standing in the doorway of my bedroom, her shoulders hunched, her face streaked with tears. I could barely lift my head from the pillow, but I smiled, or tried to, because she was here, just her. She sat at the edge of my bed, perching like a little girl again, like the child who used to sneak into my room after a nightmare, needing the safety of my arms, the reassurance of my voice. But tonight, she was the one trembling. Her hands wouldn't stay still. They fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, twisting and untwisting, as if she was unraveling right there in front of me. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "For everything. For not being here more. For being angry. For all the times I didn't call." I wanted to tell her that none of it mattered. That all I ever wanted was this. Her here. With me. Without the walls we had built over the years. But my throat was dry. My mouth too heavy to form the words. I reached out. Slowly. My fingers brushing hers. And for the first time in so long, she didn't pull away. She wrapped her hands around mine, her grip tight, as if she was afraid to let go. We sat there like that, mother and daughter, hands clasped, the space between us finally softening. There was so much I wanted to say, so many years' worth of words bottled up in my chest. The secret I had carried, the regrets I wished I could erase, the love that never, ever wavered no matter how far she drifted. But the words stayed locked inside me, caught somewhere between my heart and my mouth. I watched her, the way her face crumpled when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she pressed her forehead to our joined hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I wanted to lift my hand and smooth her hair the way I used to when she was small. I wanted to tell her she was still my little girl, that she always would be. But the room felt thinner now, as if time itself was slipping away, tugging at the edges of everything. I could feel it. The narrowing of moments, the closing of space between now and the end. So I held on. I held her hand as tightly as I could, and I hoped she understood everything I couldn't say out loud. I hoped, somehow, she knew that even when I was gone, my love for her would not fade. The night I passed, I felt it, the weight lifting. Not the weight of my tired, aching body, but the heavier one, the one I had carried in my chest for years, the ache of regret, the burden of unspoken words, the hollow echo of missed moments. I remember lying there, the room dim and still, the edges of the world blurring softly as my breath grew slower, thinner, like a thread unraveling. And even then, even in the final quiet, my mind drifted not to the things I had, not to the house or the money or the objects people would later fight over, but to them, my children, my son, my daughter. I saw them not as the strangers they had become, sharp-tongued, cold-eyed, calculating, but as they once were, small, joyful, their laughter bubbling up like music, their tiny hands reaching for mine, their faces flushed with the uncomplicated love of childhood. There was a time we belonged to each other wholly, without the hard edges of adulthood cutting between us. And in those last moments, I clung to that memory like a lifeline. I hoped, no, I prayed, that when they looked back, they would remember it too. Not the years we drifted apart, not the resentments or the silences, or the bitter fights over what I left behind, but the way we once fit together, the way they used to run to me when they were hurt, the way we used to laugh until our stomachs ached, the way we used to believe that love was enough. In my final breath, I wished for something simple, something impossibly big. I wished for them to find their way back to each other, not as heirs, not as people dividing a pile of things, but as siblings, as the only two people in this world who shared the shape of my smile, the tilt of their father's chin, the memories of the same home, the same mother. I wished for forgiveness, for healing, for a love that could survive even this. But I'll never know if they found it. That's the cruel truth of death. Once you step out of the story, you can't turn the page to see what happens next. You leave behind only pieces, fractured, scattered, and all you can do is hope the ones left behind will choose to pick them up, to mend what's broken. As the dark closed in, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I was only filled with a quiet ache, a soft hope, a single question. Will they remember the love or only the loss? And now, wherever I am, whatever is left of me, I wait. I wait to see if they'll choose each other the way I always wanted. I wait to see if they'll carry me not as a weight, but as a light, a thread that still ties them together. Because in the end, that's all we ever really leave behind, love or the chance for it. Weeks later, they found the letter. It was tucked in the back of the drawer where I kept old birthday cards, yellowed receipts, scraps of paper with recipes I never tried. My handwriting on the envelope, "For you," shook in their hands as they sat side by side, the silence stretching thick between them. I wonder how long they stared at it before opening it. Did they hesitate? Did they think, what could she have left us that we didn't already take? Inside, I told them the truth. The truth I had been too afraid to voice when I was alive. I told them about the love I felt when they were small, the fierce, breathless kind that made my chest ache just watching them sleep. I told them about the mistakes, the moments I should have reached out but didn't, the nights I lay awake wondering where I went wrong. I told them how I saw the distance growing between us and how helpless I felt to stop it. I asked them, begged them, to remember me not as a source of money, not as a list of assets or bank accounts or heirlooms. I wanted them to remember the mother who stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes, who held their fevered heads through long nights, who stood in the bleachers in the freezing rain, clapping, always clapping. I asked them to forgive me for my failings, and more than anything, I asked them to forgive themselves and each other. As they read, I imagined their faces softening. I imagined the hardness in their eyes, the anger that had calcified between them, breaking apart like thin ice under the weight of something real. I wonder if, for just a moment, they remembered the days when we were a family, truly a family, before resentment and jealousy and unspoken hurts took root in the quiet spaces between us. Maybe it's too late. Maybe the damage is done, the wound's too deep to close. Or maybe, just maybe, it's enough. Just enough to make them pause, to make them see each other not as rivals or enemies or heirs, but as brother and sister, as the only two people left who carry the same childhood memories, the same echoes of laughter, the same ghosts. I'll never know if they cried when they read my words. I'll never know if they reached for each other, if one of them whispered, "I'm sorry," if they sat in that moment and let themselves feel the weight of all they'd lost. But in my heart, I like to believe they did. If this story touched you, if you've ever loved, ever lost, ever wondered if the ties of family can survive the things we do to each other, please, like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts and subscribe to the channel. Together, let's hold space for the fragile, complicated, beautiful ties that make us family.